This is Introduction to Game Production. I'm Jim. In this lesson, we'll be talking about the first stage of game production, which is the planning phase. And if you remember from the last lesson, these are the different phases of our game production. And in the planning phase, we're going to decide what are we making. So this is our chance to set the foundation for our project and ensure that we have the resources that we need to meet the project goals. The objectives for the planning phase are to define the project vision, determine the project scope, develop a project timeline, identify key stakeholders, and then we're going to draft our game design document and our marketing plan. And we'll break each of these down throughout this lesson. When we talk about project vision, this really is the why. So why are we making this game? Or why should we make this game? This is really a big picture idea that captures the end result of your project. Now, having the why defined at the very start of the project helps ensure that you have alignment within the team throughout each phase of the game's production. And when you're making a decision about the project, you should be asking yourself, does this help us achieve the vision? Now, on the other side of that is the project scope. So if the vision is the why, the scope is the how. With the scope, you're going to determine what are we making and how does it help achieve the vision. The scope typically provides boundaries to your project, and it sets clear expectations for the team that every decision that's being made falls within the project scope and it helps to achieve the vision. You can think of it as walls around your project that keep it from expanding beyond the objectives. Now, something you'll hear a lot is scope creep, and scope creep is the gradual expansion of the project's objectives over time. And this is something that as a game producer, you constantly want to be considering that you're not expanding the project beyond the means of the team so that you can make sure that you hit that timeline and you can make sure that you stay within budget. The next thing you'll want to do as the game's producer is to develop the project timeline. As we said, each project is going to be broken down into phases. So we want to define the deliverables for each phase. And the deliverables are what do we need at the end of each phase to move to the next phase. Now, I provided just some general guidelines on how the timeline should be broken down for a project. Each project has its own needs, so this may differ for your project, but this is just a general rule that I use for my projects when I'm trying to develop the timeline. The planning and requirements phase should take up about 10% of the time. You really want to spend some time in these phases and not move on too quickly. Again, we're developing that foundation for our project and we're making sure that we have everything we need to achieve the objectives. So if you have a 10-month project, this should take about 1 month. The next phase, being the concept phase, should take about 20% of the project timeline. This is where we're making sure that the game works, that the ideas work the way we want them to. So in a 10-month project, this should take about 2 months. The design and implementation phase is where a lot of the work is going to be done. So this will take up a majority of the project's timeline. So in a 10-month project, this should take about 4 months of really building out each of the game's features and making sure that they all work together. One thing that I think a lot of teams neglect is to give themselves enough time for testing of the game to debug all the things that aren't working and making sure that everything is working together. So in a 10-month project, the testing phase should take about 3 months, and this gives ample time to ensure that the game meets those quality requirements. So when you're working through developing the timeline for your game, you should set realistic dates for each phase exit review to ensure that you're able to meet the project timeline and stay within the budget. Now, there are a few different ways to break down how each of these phases should run. As the producer, it's up to you to determine which of these you should use. Some terms you may hear thrown around are waterfall or hybrid or various other methodologies that are used. So this brings us to our first research topic. So what is waterfall in terms of project management? What is agile project management? What is a scrum? What is a sprint? What is a Kanban? and how is this a tool that can help you as a game producer? And you should ask yourself, which of these are commonly used in game production, or which one do you see that would be most beneficial for you? And it may not just be one or the other. A lot of teams take a hybrid approach to game production, or they will break down each phase and maybe use a different methodology for each of the phases. At the end of the day, this takes some trial and error for you as a game producer to find the method that works best for managing your projects. So I recommend that you just take a few minutes to yourself, go do your own independent research these topics, and I'll see you when you come back. The next thing we want to do is identify the key stakeholders. Now, a stakeholder is an individual, a group, or an organization that has an interest in or is impacted by the project. And usually stakeholders are broken down into two categories. We have internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. Internal key stakeholders are going to be the management for your game or for your company. They're going to be your project team leads, which could be managers, or it could just be subject matter experts in each of the fields. And then your external stakeholders are going to be your target audience, any investors to the project that have a vested interest in the game's production, and even any contractors or suppliers that you may bring in to fill gaps within your team. And the next thing we want to do is we want to start to capture a lot of this information. So in most cases, you're going to be using what is called a game design document, or GDD. And the GDD is a comprehensive outline of the project vision, goals, and objectives for your game. Some things that are commonly included in a GDD are an overview of the game, a narrative summary, gameplay mechanics, art direction, technical specifications to work on the project or to run the game. A monetization strategy may be included in the GDD, and also some basic information about the marketing and launch of your game. Now, the GDD should be a document that is accessible by everyone, and it's going to be a living document, which means we're going to be adding to it over time. Throughout each of the phases, you'll be adding more and more information to the GDD. And the goal is that if a new person were to come onto the project, they could review the GDD and have all the information necessary to pick up where the game is at the current stage of development. So it's really important that you're constantly updating this and constantly adding to this, or that you assign someone on your team to make those updates to the GDD. Now, because the GDD is going to be accessible by everyone on the project, there may be some proprietary information that you want to leave out. And in some cases, these are things that you'll have in other documents, and one of those documents will be the marketing plan. Now, a lot of people, when they think marketing, they just think advertising, they think of commercials or ads that they see, and that is a part of marketing, but really, marketing is a much bigger thing. Marketing is how the world views your brand and your products. So it's the outside world looking in. And so the marketing plan should be a comprehensive guide of all of the various aspects of marketing your game or marketing your brand to the public. And this may be a document that's viewed by leadership of your game or investors or even senior management. So this document should have market research in it. It should have your product positioning, your value proposition. It should have the market segmentation of your project. It should have a competitive analysis of how do you fit into the market and who your competitors are. It should talk about product pricing and extensions, and it should define the product launch and roadmap for your projects. Now, if you're not in marketing, you may have someone else on your team that handles the marketing of your game and of your company, but in smaller teams, this typically falls onto the game producer to manage, so you may want to work on some of these skill sets as well as a game producer. So now we're going to work on our first activity. What I want you to do is take some time to create a draft of the GDD. And for now, we're not going to have a lot of information, so we just want to do an outline and define some of the major points of our project. And remember, the GDD is a living document, so the details are going to be filled in as we progress through each phase of the production. And then we also want to take some time to draft our marketing plan. Now, again, you're not going to have all the information, but at the very least, at this point, you should have a value proposition, you should have a launch date and the target platforms, and you should define your key audience. And having these documents ready at this point is going to help show others that you're ready to start with the production of your game. And these could be investors, this could be leadership, or this could be other people that you want to bring into the project to help you. And it shows that you at least have an understanding of the vision, the scope, and the goals of your project. Now, I have created some template documents that you can use throughout this course, and I'll put a link in the description where you can go buy these documents. These templates do include some helpful tips that you can use while you're filling in the documents. Now, this isn't required. You can go and find these documents for free on the internet. There's plenty of templates for each of these documents, but I did spend some extra time when I created them to make sure that you had some helpful tips and tricks when filling them out. They are available for purchase on my Patreon. I'll put a link in the description of the video where you can go and buy these documents. But like I said, it isn't required. There's plenty of free templates out there, so there is no need to purchase these to proceed throughout the rest of the course. But once you have a document template, either mine or a free one, I recommend that you pause the video now and just start to fill out some basic information in these documents, develop that project timeline, and when you get done with that, I'll see you back here. So now we have some of the basic things filled out for our project. We've reached the end of our planning phase. So you'll want to have a planning phase review meeting, and you want to pull in all the key stakeholders, all the investors, management, anyone else that has a vested interest in the project. And you want to have a meeting where you review everything that we've done so far. And the goal of this meeting is to determine, is the game worth making? And we want to get buy-in from the key stakeholders that they commit to the timeline and they commit to the budget. We also want to review the resource requirements and ensure that we have the right resources needed to proceed with the project. So in a lot of companies where there may be multiple projects going on at the same time, you may get the direction to wait until some of the resources become available. So the end of the phase review meeting will have one of three determinations. We're either going to stop the project, which means we've determined that it's not worth making, we do not want to allocate the resources required, we don't have the budget for it, or we can't meet the project timelines. You may get the direction to wait until resources become available or until funds become available, or you get the buy-in to proceed to the next phase, which is the requirements phase. And this is what we'll talk about in the next video. But I want to leave this video with just a few tips to help you with the planning phase. The first one is that people tend to be pretty bad at estimating how long tasks should take. And in most cases, they tend to underestimate. So my recommendation is to build a little bit of buffer into each of the phases. If someone tells you something's going to take them 4 weeks, make sure that you give yourself 5. You just always want to have a little bit of buffer to work with your project. And part of that is because it's better to be ahead of schedule than behind schedule. So having that buffer will ensure that you're able to meet the timeline of your project. Now, a big part of being a producer is driving tasks to completion. So it's important that you're constantly checking in with teammates, you're constantly having regular meetings to make sure that you're moving along according to the timeline and that you're going to be able to consistently meet the objectives. Now, a big part of planning is preparing for the journey, which means you need to consider unforeseen obstacles and plan for contingencies. So what if someone leaves the project? Or what if another project comes up that pulls resources away from you? What if the market shifts and now you need to release the game with an expedited timeline? These are all things that you need to consider during the planning phase, and you should always have some contingency plans for unforeseen obstacles. And the last tip for the planning phase, and this is going to be throughout the entire project, is to beware of scope creep. This is something that can easily derail a project, easily cause you to go over budget and over timeline. And as a producer, it's important that you're constantly keeping the game within the scope that was defined during the planning phase. I hope you got a lot out of this lesson. I hope that you have a better understanding now of the planning for your project, and I'll see you in the next lesson.